We're finally tying a little bow on season 1 of The Office today. Hi, and welcome back to Belated Binge, The Office, the re-binge podcast that doesn't take itself or the show too seriously. My name's Zach. I'm your host, revisiting some of the most iconic series that I nearly missed out on. Today, we'll recap season 1. I'll give out my Bingies, if you will, for favorite episode, favorite character, favorite thing of the season, and of course, what I didn't like as much, and some listener feedback that I received as well. Let's do it.
The Belated Binge Podcast.
Before we jump in, spoilers. Duh. Language. Maybe? Use earbuds as needed. Shout out to Alex and Katie of the Bonus Binge Squad. More on Patreon later in the episode. I've said this throughout our episodes covering The Office, but I can describe my feelings on the first season, particularly with this rewatch, pretty easily. I never really liked season 1 the first time I watched the series, or the first 4 times I tried to watch the series might be more accurate in that depiction, but I enjoyed it a lot more this time around. And I think it's probably because I'm familiar with the characters at this point. I've only watched the series through front to back one time. I've seen some episodes dispersed intermittently throughout my life since then. But as far as a full rewatch, this is only my second time going for it. And it's the first time that I'm watching the super fan editions of these episodes. But because it is a rewatch, I am familiar with the characters. I'm familiar with their general arcs that we see throughout the series, and I get the humor of the show. So now I can actually go back and appreciate the cringe, I guess, from some of the early episodes more than I did when I watched them the first time before I got it. There's always that Office there is a little bit of a thing with The Office and its massive fan base, and those that are die-hard Office fans that are, might have a little bit of "you don't really get it, do you?" kind of thing to them. Maybe I'm just projecting myself onto other people. That's possible. I enjoyed season 1 more than the first go around or any of my first attempts. Still don't love season 1. But it was far more enjoyable this time. My next point in my rewatch experience with season 1 is that my memory for this show is really bad. Every episode, when I did my super fan or super fraud segment, I felt basically clueless. If you're new, as I mentioned, I've only watched it through once and I've never seen the superfan episodes. So when I'm watching these superfan editions, I try to spot and pick out what was extra, whatever deleted scene got left in, if something seemed like it was extended, that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that I'm terrible at it. Just so bad at it. So bad, in fact, I'm probably the worst thing, second to my last point in my just brief synopsis of season 1, and that is Michael Scott. He's the worst. Season 1 Michael Scott is awful. Just awful. And that's pretty much it. It's a really short season, apparently because the network wasn't sure if the show was actually going to last or if it was going to just go kaput. Where have I heard that before? Oh, the episode that I recorded with Juliana from Into the Fold and MuggleNet and a whole bunch of other things for the Harry Potter binge we talked about Fantastic Beasts recently. If you didn't hear that episode, definitely worth listening to or watching if you are a YouTube viewer. But she was the one who described Fantastic Beasts as going kaput. And I think I have now officially adopted it into my vocabulary unintentionally because I just said it. Anyways, The Office didn't end up going kaput, obviously. It became one of like the biggest streaming shows ever. So, but way back when in season one, the big wig executives, they were, I guess, only greenlighting a couple episodes at a time or something. And then I think it got picked up for season two, I think, in spurts as well. Like I think they I'm not totally sure on this. I think I heard it on, oh, I'm gonna mess it up. 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 I've listened to episodes of both Office Ladies as well as Off the Beat. Both of those podcasts are hosted by participants in the cast of The Office. Office Ladies are the actresses that play, um, gosh, it's Jenna Fisher who plays Pam, and it's Angela Kinsley who plays, well, Angela. And Off the Beat is hosted by Brian Baumgartner, who plays Kevin. And I can't remember which one of them I got that little tiny factoid from. And I don't remember which one of them I was listening to when I thought I remembered them saying something along the lines of season two was a bit of a slow roll as well, until it did finally get picked up for an entire season for season two. It's honestly, it's hard to believe that this show went 9 seasons and had like a second and maybe third life on streaming and gotten as huge as it's gotten, and yet it kind of almost didn't get past the first 2, 4, 6 episodes. It's kind of nuts, but I'm looking forward to figuring out how to best dive into season two for the podcast, which is a thought that I'll probably pick up later on in this episode. But I did think that in this little recap that we're doing, that since it was a very short season, I could just run through the episodes real quick and do some kind of like Bingy awards, if you will. So the first episode is obviously the pilot. It's a shot-for-shot remake of the UK version of the pilot. This is where we're obviously introduced to like the basic premise that this is a documentary in this company in a small town that sells paper. We're obviously introduced to our main characters, and this is where Jan comes to tell Michael that the company's downsizing, and that secret lasts like no time at all. It's immediately spread. Way to go, Pam. And then immediately confirmed. Way to go, Michael. Not the most, what's the word? I don't know what the word is. Not the most locked down meetings that they're having at Dunder Mifflin Scranton branch. And it doesn't take long into the first episode that you realize that this documentary is a mockumentary, and this is going to get super silly. So that's the pilot. That's episode 1. Episode 2 is Diversity Day. This is the ultimate cringe episode. I think if you were to scour the fandom for a consensus or a poll, if you will, this one would be in the running for one of the cringiest of the series. I know that Scott's Tots is going to be on that list, and there are some others that we haven't gotten to yet in this particular re-binge, but we will probably in like 6 years at this rate, but we will get to them. And this one is definitely going to be up there. They clearly wanted to run this episode early on to tell the world just exactly what this show is really about, and it does that. I've heard, where did I hear this? This was another podcast, I think, that said this, where this was a fan podcast. I'm doing my best to give proper credit to these things. without having them in my notes. But I believe it might have been Somehow I Manage podcast who did a rewatch episode by episode podcast. I think it might have been them. But I remember the hosts saying that when they introduce The Office to somebody new, they send them to they send them back to Diversity Day, because the thought process there is essentially, if you can get through Diversity Day and the cringe, then you can watch the rest of the series and really enjoy it. But anyways, the gist of it is, it's a diversity training seminar. It's conducted in the conference room because of a certain Chris Rock bit that Michael recited and made people very uncomfortable with. And in true Michael Scott fashion, he decided to follow it up with his own diversity training, where he makes the employees of the office play a very, very racist game of Heads Up. And it pretty much ends in Kelly slapping the shit out of Michael for his imitation of a very crude Indian stereotype. So the cringe level is high, I guess, to reiterate my original point on that episode. Episode 3 is healthcare. Michael's informed that he needs to pick a new employee healthcare plan for the branch. He's absolutely stoked about it until Jan tells him that it has to be cheap. And therefore, not good. And Michael doesn't like to deliver bad news, so he gets Dwight to pick the new healthcare plan. And that's the whole episode. Dwight being just drunk with power and completely unreasonable about choosing a healthcare plan, and he locks them into an awful plan, and Michael hides from the responsibility. And that is healthcare in a nutshell. Healthcare does have one of the best Dwight quotes from the series, though, or exchanges with Jim and Pam, where he does the I can raise and lower my cholesterol on command. And they're like, why would you want to raise your cholesterol? So I can lower it. That exchange is quite enjoyable, and that comes from that episode. Episode 4 is The Alliance. Dwight asks Jim to form an alliance. He thinks that that's somehow going to protect them from the company's downsizing. Jim and Pam spend the rest of the episode messing with Dwight under the guise of said alliance. And at some point, Dwight ends up hiding in a box in the warehouse to spy on a rumored other alliance meeting of some sort. And the episode ends with Roy walking in on Jim and Pam being a little too touchy-feely while they laugh about their successful partnership in the alliance hijinks. And that cringe level is pretty high too, particularly that ending scene. Episode 5 is basketball. I'm going to give you 2 guesses on what they do in that episode. You got it. Pickleball tournament. Michael challenges the warehouse workers to a sales versus warehouse game of hoops, and the loser's supposed to come in and work on Saturday. It's pretty much the worst played game of basketball potentially ever. Michael is as terrible as you imagine at basketball and thinks he's as great as, well, anyone ever in history. Seriously, some of the side shots with Michael talking to the camera throughout that episode, they just are shockingly difficult to watch. Anyways, things do get a little physical in the basketball game, particularly between Jim and Roy, but Michael does catch an elbow and ends up calling off the game. The sales team wins, but Michael doesn't make anyone come into work on Saturday because they're not going to stop downsizing anyway. And he's terribly afraid of the warehouse workers. The last episode of the season, that's right, last episode, because there's only 6 in season 1, is Hot Girl. And this is the one where Michael lets a woman come post up in the conference room and sell purses to the employees. As the title suggests, the girl is attractive. She also has red hair. They end up referring to her as a hotter version of Pam. And after dodging shots from Dwight, Kevin, a full on stalking situation from Michael, among, I think that was all of them that hit on her, Jim actually ends up taking her out for drinks and then home after. And that's probably going exactly where you think it's going, but we don't get that on screen, and season 2 hasn't started yet. So that's it. Those are the 6 episodes that exist in season 1 of The Office. And like I said, not my favorite collection of Office episodes, maybe, but there is absolutely comedic gold scattered throughout these episodes, and it is way better on a rewatch, in my opinion. But for me, I think that The Alliance is the best episode of season 1. It has everything that I want from this show, particularly in an early kind of introductory version or episode of the show. It's got Jim and Pam pranks just out the wazoo, and that is a component of the show that I particularly gravitate towards. I'm here for the Jim and Pam with the romance stuff, I guess. But that's not. I don't. That doesn't matter so much to me until like way later. I think in the series, but I'm here for it. I like those two together, but I particularly like their relationship within the office and what they mean with each other, to be that like kind of that yin and yang of just hijinks and just office fun, levity, bringing some joy to the episodes. A lot of what makes this a mockumentary is them. It's not just, the show isn't just Michael being the idiot boss and Dwight being the completely unrealistic, oh my gosh, like I'm not like kind of character. But these two are, you believe that they could be real people that despite how little work they actually get done in the office. But I'm really here for, I really enjoy that part of their relationship and of these episodes, with when it's a heavy Jim and Pam playing some jokes and tricks. I'm probably going to be into that episode from here onward. In The Alliance, Dwight is also very ridiculous, but he's not so obnoxious. Like, this isn't one of those episodes where he's completely over the top, completely just unrealistic that you could even think that that's a real human being on the face of the planet. Granted, I mean, he's pretty much a caricature throughout the series, but in this episode, he has his quirkiness and his thing, but he's not ridiculous. Not ridiculously obnoxious anyways. He is ridiculous because he's Dwight, but in the best Dwight ways. And Michael's kind of in the background a little bit in this episode, and I think that's something that I really like about it, because I don't like season 1 Michael. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet on the podcast. Perhaps. But that's, I think, why I like it. And I was just talking about Dwight, but I think, and how ridiculous he is, but I think he's the standout character in season 1, which is kind of surprising for me to say based on what I just said about how much I enjoy Jim and Pam, and particularly Jim. I really like Jim's character on this series. Like, he's just my kind of humor. Like, the sarcasm is right up my alley. But Dwight in season 1, he's got plenty of like really annoying things that he does, but they really showcase him in the middle of the series in ways that are, I think, really, really beneficial to setting up that character to ultimately become that like quirky, annoying, almost antagonist if you're tuning in for and into like the Jim and Pam side of things. You almost get to pick sides, right, in this show, but the stakes aren't very high. And this the Alliance episode, I think, does a really good job with, or not just the Alliance episode, but I really like him in the Alliance episode, but the full season of season 1 does a good job in setting up Dwight and giving you something um to look forward to. Like, what kind of nonsense is Dwight going to get into in this episode? And that's really fun. He's essentially the star of the show for 3 and 4, which are like right in the heart of this season. And those are, as a reminder, healthcare and the Alliance. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Dwight in season 1, and I guess, like, if my favorite episode is the Alliance and Dwight's the star of the Alliance episode, then I guess I gotta give the dude his due. Um, I think though, and I was talking about this a little bit when I was riffing just a few minutes ago, but I think my favorite thing about season 1 is the Jim and Pam alliance. See what I did there? Anyway, we haven't got to the point where it gets sort of annoying. I mentioned, like, the romance part. I'm here for it, but I'm here for it later. The will they won't they date thing it drags out and it gets annoying at times. Right now it's all new though. So what we see is we have two people that we're introduced to that clearly have really good chemistry together, and they make each other happy in really fun ways. And I think that's a really big bright spot to, especially to season 1 and to get this thing launched. And when your show's about selling paper, like, you need funny stuff happening that isn't Michael's incompetence and Dwight's lunacy. And they're kind of the perfect balance. They're funny, but they're real. You believe they exist. And yeah, I mean, they have their flaws, right? Jim does too much pranking, not enough working, but you can easily see that a toned down version of Jim could literally be somebody working in the cubicle right next to you. And Pam is kind of a perfect, like, in the, like, pretty but modest and can't really stand being a receptionist, but has no idea what else to do with her life. Like, you feel like you know this person. She feels like she's rooted in a real human being that you would run into at Starbucks or whatever. Like, both of them, they just they have that quality of believability to them that is missing from characters like Michael or like Dwight. Like, they're a bit too over the top. They'd be fired from any company immediately. But the Jim and Pam stuff, again, it's over the top for the show, but scale it back just a little bit and you feel like you know them. Anyway, so those are the things I like. Those are my bingies, if you will, for season 1. That's the stuff that I enjoy the most from season 1. What I don't like about season 1 is Michael. And that's basically the list. He's a sleazy used car salesman, just like caricature, who he lacks the basic, like, he really lacks anything to really root for. It's just a stark contrast from the Michael Scott that we love from the series and who that character becomes. But that character just hasn't shown up yet. When he does flip from being this selfish sleazebag to lovable goofball, that's when the show catapults into that conversation of, like, is this the best comedic TV show of all time? I'm not saying it is. There are plenty that I haven't seen at all or haven't seen enough of to make a claim like that. But it's in the conversation. And if Michael Scott stayed this season 1 version of Michael Scott, I don't think that becomes the case. That's just me. Still, despite that, this rewatch has been fun so far. So I hope you're enjoying listening along with me as I rewatch these as well. I want to share a little bit about what I'm struggling with personally with it on this podcast. I make these podcast episodes to essentially do 2 things. One, deep diving. I like to dig into like foreshadowing, theories, character development, and that sort of thing. Kind of the nuances, read between the lines of things, and really nerd out over the series that I cover on this podcast. And the other thing that I like to do is make fun of stuff. I like to poke fun at silly plot holes and inconsistencies and dumb decisions made by characters and point out all the plot convenience and plot armor that gets thrown around and all the conveniences that are out there. And just it brings me a lot of joy. I've said this probably on this podcast before, but I have many times in my life told somebody that I started to get to know or whatever, when I felt like maybe they needed to understand my personality a little bit going in, and I didn't want them to think I was just a terrible person, I would tell them, if I'm not giving you shit, it means I don't like you. And that is how I treat this podcast and the series that I'm covering on the podcast. These are some of my favorite things to absorb for entertainment, but my kind of engagement and interaction with things that I like is sometimes making fun of it. Here's the struggle. To quote someone who commented on something that I posted on social media, that you're going to hear probably in a little bit, The Office isn't that deep. Not wrong. The show's not deep. This show is a comedy. A cringy, silly, over-the-top, mockumentary-style comedy. In a lot of ways, these are caricatures as much as they're meant to be characters. You're not supposed to take it seriously. And so you can't really make fun of it either. It's making fun of itself. So I find myself recapping the episodes and providing some super thorough analysis oftentimes, like, this is funny. And yeah, I guess I'm saying this to say that I'm having a harder time getting my footing for the podcast with The Office as opposed to Harry Potter and Sons of Anarchy. Those two, I feel like, while I'm still evolving and developing in a lot of ways, I feel like those two, I feel pretty comfortable in approaching them, and I feel pretty fulfilled in the content that I'm able to create with them. And I think it's just going to keep getting better as I go with them, and as I continue to, weave in some new ideas and new concepts and stuff like that. They can the ball can continue rolling with those, and I feel like I can do that well. The Office, I'm having a harder time with it because what I do with the other two may not be as enjoyable here for you to listen to. So I say that to say that I might be trying some different things in season 2 to just kind of find the footing a little bit for The Office, and figure out how to be as entertaining for you on this rewatch podcast as I possibly can be. So that's kind of where I'm at with The Office, and that's just a peek behind the curtain. So if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, if you have the desire to participate in some way, shape, or form, fashion to the podcast, I would love to hear it. There's a million ways that you can get a hold of me. I'll talk about one in just a second, but there are others. I would encourage you to check out the show notes for the podcast, because there's links to many options to get in touch with me, and I welcome all of it. Before I do go, I did want to share with you my favorite listener feedback from the Let's Rewrite The Office questions from season 1. And for this, it doesn't even matter what episode it comes from, because these two responses pretty much perfectly sum up any question I could have possibly asked in this particular segment. But they did come from my question from episode 4, which I don't even remember what that was at this very moment, and it's not written down in my notes, but over here on my phone I can see the responses that I got, which are covering up the question, both on TikTok. is where these come from. Samaconda, I think I'm saying that correctly, said Michael would do something overboard, then do something that would get a normal person fired, and offer Ryan a full-time position. Does it matter what question I asked? That's pretty much the answer, right? For every episode, Michael's going to do something overboard, and that something would definitely get a normal person fired, and he would offer Ryan a full-time position because that's like his main goal in life is to get Ryan a full-time position. He just wants to always work with Ryan, and that's pretty much it. And the other comment is on that same exact situation, and that's where I got the office ain't that deep, bro. So both of those do sum up that style of analysis for this season of The Office. And maybe that's a piece of the podcast that gets a little bit of a tweak or a revisit for season 2. But for now, I want to know what you like about season 1 of The Office. I want to know what your favorite character, your favorite episode, and your favorite thing or theme from season 1 is. And you can let me know by leaving a voicemail with your thoughts. Just click on the leave a voicemail icon on my website, belatedbinge.com. And I think that sufficiently wraps up season 1 of The Office. I am looking forward to season 2 and whatever I come up with to try to make it as enjoyable to listen to me or watch me re-watch it along with you. So yeah, let's do this. It's gonna be fun. If you are so inclined and you haven't done so already, and you're looking forward to moving forward in this relationship that we have here, make sure you're subscribed or following the podcast, whether that be on YouTube or podcast apps, literally everywhere. Consider becoming a patron if you would. Patreon.com. Lots of cool perks, including shout outs in every episode, early access to episodes, bonus episodes. Currently I am sharing some like fan fiction that I wrote as a sequel to Sons of Anarchy. I'm doing like 11 chapters in a like audiobook format style that I'm releasing on Patreon as soon as I get them read and edited and churned out. They're available there, as well as all the other bonus episodes that I've done for any 3 of the binges that I have going on at this moment. And make sure to tell all your friends how cool they'd be too if they were listening or watching Belated Binge, The Office.